We spent a lot of time talking about the Bengals offseason and the draft this week. Today, we're joined by PFF's Sam Monson to take a first look at this year's draft class.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow, joined today by PFF's Sam Monson to talk about the NFL draft. You can find Sam, of course, at PFF_Sam on Twitter and on the PFF NFL podcast with Steve Palazzolo over with the great work they're doing over at Pro Football Focus. This podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. So hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow anywhere you get your podcasts, and we'll be delivered to your devices when we upload our content every day. And Sam, the combine right around the corner. You just did your episode with Steve on how to fix all the AFC North teams, so I know you're ready with your offseason plan for the Bengals. Maybe before we talk about where the draft is strong and weak and the guys you're interested in watching at the combine and whether the Bengals should use their first-round draft pick on Bijan Robinson if he's available, because this has been a hot topic in Bengals Twitter. Can you just run through the summary, the synopsis? And I think you and Steve were in agreement on the offseason plan for the Bengals to get back to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, I think largely they're in a pretty good spot. They didn't need to do too much craziness. I think that the big things we've been talking about are, obviously they have these big contracts upcoming, the Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins types of deals. And, I think are both in agreement that they should try and keep those three guys together as long as humanly possible. Make sure that Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are never separated. And if you're going to go somewhere else with the money, T. Higgins makes a lot of sense. Keeping that kind of nucleus together going forward is probably a huge deal when you look at the landscape and the rest of the teams that Cincinnati is going to have to get past to make it back to a Super Bowl. Love what they did last offseason. I think they did a great job of overhauling that offensive line. I still think they can keep going at that they're not 100% set yet with the group that they have there. There are still improvements they can make. And then just generally a little bit of tinkering around the edges. I think they've future-proofed that secondary in a pretty good spot. Dax Hill presumably steps in to one starting safety spot this offseason. Cam Taylor-Britt at corner as well. And then if they could keep a Von Bell around and not have, the majority of the secondary leaving in one offseason, I think that would probably be a pretty useful move.
I know that a draft crush of this podcast was Juan Thornhill, who is also a free agent, who I wouldn't hate. Von Bell, Juan Thornhill, pick one. Get a solid veteran safety in there so you're not leaning on a couple of young guys. I could certainly see that. One position that is unsettled, you talked about the offensive line, is right tackle for the Bengals. La'el Collins with the late season ACL knee explosion injury that has his status, I think, in a little bit of doubt, for maybe a lot of doubt, given his history for next season. Right tackle, a position that the Bengals need to address. Can't be Hakeem Adeniji out there. We've seen him in a couple of opportunities now. Hope is not a plan for the offensive line, we'd like to say on this podcast. So given the draft, what can you tell me about offensive tackle in the first and second rounds? Is there a guy there that you, or a group of guys perhaps, does it line up with where the Bengals are picking this year in your opinion?
Yeah, I think there are some offensive tackles they could go with. I also think, though, it's a reasonable free agent group for just kind of get what they did last year, just sort of getting an average starting caliber tackle. I think those kinds of guys are available in free agency, and you could bring in somebody like Jermaine Illuminor from the Raiders, or Kelvin Beachum is the guy Steve's trying to send everywhere as their
Illuminor's a hot name here. Yeah,
as their emergency starter or a swing tackle. Like, I think that was actually a really sound way of treating this last year of let's try and get a few guys in at a modest amount of money that we know are guaranteed upgrades, not mess around in the draft trying to find a guy who may or may not be an upgrade based off how he plays in year one. Let's get an almost certain upgrade going. And then we go into the draft with a lot more flexibility to add to future proofing spots or just pick the best player available or whatever. So for them, I think they can definitely get a tackle where they're picking, but I would be really interested in trying to get one of those guys coming in who won't break the bank, but will definitely upgrade what they have. And you're right. Like Lyle Collins, given his injury history and the injury he suffered, is a pretty big question mark. But quietly, he wasn't great as a pass blocker last season anyway. He was a huge upgrade in the run game, but he was a long way away from what he used to be before he had all of these injuries. So I think it would be kind of smart to address that area anyway, even if he was 100% healthy this offseason.
Yeah, I think either way, it's a draft a tackle spot for the Bengals. Jonah Williams on the 5th-year option, coming off of his worst year as a pass blocker as a pro. Dealt with some injuries, dislocated both kneecaps, which is crazy and unlucky. And mostly was bad against Myles Garrett, right? Like he was okay for a lot of the season, was bad against Myles Garrett, has a good track record as a solid left tackle. A lot of Bengals fans talking about Mike McGlinchey this week, talking about Orlando Brown this week. And, we've talked about that plenty, but is there a guy that you like as that maybe he's not ready to play right away? Maybe it's Anton Harrison. Maybe he needs a little bit of polish, right? Where all the tools are there. The Bengals like to draft for the future. A lot of young tackles, Broderick Jones, Anton Harrison, DeJuan Jones, all younger guys in this draft class. Do you feel like it's deep at tackle? I mean, I've heard people talking about this isn't a very good draft class in general. How is it at tackle?
I think it's a reasonable draft class to tackle. DeJuan Jones is the guy that really intrigues me. Just that incredible wingspan, the largest wingspan we've ever measured. His movement skills are good. He's not like he gets compared because of his size sometimes to a guy like Daniel Faalele from, a year or so ago from Minnesota. Mm-hmm. He moves better than him. He's not the same kind of guy. I think he's got a lot more ability to survive on the edge with his movement skills before you even get to the fact that he's giant and, has that kind of physical ability. Showed really well at the Senior Bowl when he was down there. I think that's an important sort of feather in his cap for showing he can be a good player going forward. And I think he would be a really interesting guy to bring in. The Jonah Williams thing, the injuries, I think, are an important point for him because it was definitely his worst season in the NFL. Gave up 12 sacks over the season, which tied for the league lead. And it's obviously a huge number. But I'd almost forgotten that he'd suffered those injuries. And I remember once they came back to mind, I remember thinking that that was going to put him out for a long time. And it didn't at all. He got back in the lineup pretty quickly after the dislocated kneecap.
The first one he played through, same game.
Right.
He missed like a quarter maybe.
I've never played offensive tackle with a dislocated kneecap, but I don't imagine it's fun. And I can imagine that, that can make a difference when you're trying to block Myles Garrett. So I would have a reasonable amount of confidence that he will have a better year next year than he has this season. And every year up until now has been, solid left tackle play.
We'll get back to our interview with Sam Monson of Pro Football Focus, but today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. You've heard me talk about Built Bars a ton on Locked On Bengals. What are Built Bars? Well, they're the number one protein bar on the planet. High in protein, low in sugar, low in calories. And when you're thinking about health, and yes, they're healthy, you're not sacrificing taste. And that's the part that really matters when you're talking about Built Bars. They're covered in 100% chocolate. They taste great. They come in a bunch of different flavors. And now they're more available than ever. Not only can you go to built.com to get them, but you can also check them out at your local Walmart and Sam's Club store. So maybe you want to get a bulk 13-bar box at Sam's Club. You can do that, or you can check them out in person at Walmart as well. So don't delay. Go get the number one protein bar on the planet today. Yes, I meant to rhyme. And yes, you should go to built.com or Sam's Club or Walmart and try one today.
On the topic of the offensive line, before we talk about the rest of the draft, I don't mean for this to be entirely focused on the offensive line. A quick question about what you know about stability of certain metrics in PFF. I was looking at true pass set, pass blocking grade, and how stable that is. I went back the last 5 years and looked at guards that played at least 50% of their team snaps in one of their first 2 years and kind of looked at that number as it progressed. It looks like a remarkably stable metric with a few outliers making big jumps, making jumps of more than maybe 5 points in terms of the grading average. So talking about Cordell Volson, who I think is going to start at left guard for the Bengals next year. They tend to give these guys extra chances to show that they belong as starters. Is there reasonable expectation that he could take a leap, like that year 2 leap? He was an older rookie, but it's a big jump from North Dakota State to the NFL. So there's some confounding factors there.
Yeah, it is generally a stable number, but it's also, I mean, it obviously, the idea of is it strips out all the stuff that doesn't really mean anything, but can potentially affect just a sort of general pressure rate or general performance and that kind of stuff. It gets rid of those types of plays that really only muddy the waters when it comes to that kind of thing. So theoretically, it should be a better number than the things people are using otherwise. So I think it is pretty stable year to year and does do a pretty good job of predicting future play. But young offensive linemen tend to take a little bit of time to develop. Like those guys have a relatively slow development curve relative to other positions in the NFL. And that gets kind of made a mockery of sometimes when you have guys like Tristan Wirfs step in and is like a top 5 tackle from the day he stepped foot on the NFL. And there's a few guys like that who were able to come in right away and immediately look like they belong. And they're some of the best players in the league. But a lot of offensive linemen, the majority of them, I think, have they take a while. And sometimes it's not even year 2, it's year 3 before you see a real jump in those guys. And you have to, live through a certain amount of growing pains before you're going to get the high-end version of that player. And I think that's a difficult balance for teams to figure out how much time you give an offensive lineman that you believe in versus coming to the realization that you're wrong and that you have your faith in a guy that's never actually going to produce at that kind of level. I think it's easier for teams to keep faith with a guy when he was a high draft pick and you have a lot invested in him, et cetera, et cetera. When he's not, when you don't have that amount invested in him, it's a lot easier to go, maybe that guy's never going to get there. We didn't love him to begin with. Let's start looking for alternatives. So probably not fairly, this is probably a make or break year for Volson. And he's the guy that we liked coming out and I think has the ability to step up, but he needs to kind of accelerate that jump. He probably can't wait until year 3. It needs to be this season.
I think he is very well liked by the coaching staff for what it's worth. One of those guys that, coaches love to say he does everything the right way. He's one of those guys. And that's why he won the job coming out of training camp. And so I think he does have a leash. This coaching staff in general has been pretty long leash for a lot of guys. If they do things the right way, I'm going to use that in air quotes because I think that's really important to them. The culture thing is really important to them. So is there anything there with the age though for older rookies or is it really an NFL experience thing? Would you say? Yeah,
I think I haven't actually
looked the same age as Jonah Williams.
Right. I haven't looked at that specifically for offensive linemen.
Okay.
I'm sure there's probably something to that, but he's got a lot of confounding factors when you think of age, the level of competition he came to, plus, where he was drafted and therefore what he has to go through. He's going to be a pretty fascinating test case for a lot of these things going forward.
So let's shift gears and get out of the offensive line world a little bit, but certainly if you have points to make about the draft in general as they pertain to the offensive line, don't shy away. But talking about this draft class on the whole, I mentioned it earlier, a lot of discussion around, maybe this isn't the strongest draft class we've seen in recent years. But certainly there are some positions that seem to be deep and seem to be relatively strong. Where do you think the strengths are in this draft class, especially in the early part, in days 1 and 2, and maybe early day 3? Where do you like the depth in this class?
I think it's one of the best running back classes we've seen in years for all the teams care about that now, or people care about that in this world of running backs don't matter. And we've diminished the value of them. Like this is as strong a running back group as you're going to see. I think it's really strong at corner as well. There maybe there isn't a Sauce Gardner in this group on the basis that there isn't a Sauce Gardner in most classes, but the depth at cornerback, I think, is really, really strong. There's a lot of guys that are going to go in the first couple of rounds. And it looks like one of the most deep cornerback classes that we've seen come out in years.
The Bengals like to draft for the future. I think cornerback is absolutely in play. Chidobe Awuzie on the last year of his deal. Mike Hilton has 2 more years on his deal, of course, so he's around for the Joe Burrow rookie contract window's entirety, which will extend even after extension a couple more years here. But I wouldn't be shocked at all to see them go with a cornerback in the first round. But let's talk about that running back. Deep running back class. And Bijan Robinson said to be, and we get this a lot, but maybe actually is, the generational running back prospect. So let's start there. Is Bijan Robinson, in your opinion, a generational once in 10 years running back prospect?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably the best running back that PFF has seen come into the draft. And PFF has been grading since 2014 in the college. So the only other guy I think that would be in that conversation would be Saquon Barkley. I think there were enough concerns about what Saquon Barkley did badly, his propensity to bounce everything outside, sort of not necessarily hitting every hole where he should, that I would give the nod to Bijan Robinson over Barkley. So I think it's those two, maybe Christian McCaffrey, Leonard Fournette, depending on where you were on those two guys. But I mean, he's probably the best running back to come along since maybe Adrian Peterson. That's 2007. So I think that qualifies. I mean, he's the best running back that's come into the league in a long, long time.
So given that, if you're Duke Tobin and the Bengals, and I don't think Bijan Robinson is necessarily available where the Bengals are drafting, but as you mentioned,
right,
the league continues to devalue the position. And obviously this is a difficult question to answer in a vacuum, but are you sitting there like the Arrested Development meme and thinking, but maybe it will work for us as the contender who's going to draft a running back late in the first round to push him over the hump? Do you make that move?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the motivations for the move. Like I've come around a little bit on the concepts of where you draft running backs and whether they're worth a first round pick at all. I think if your motivations for drafting a running back in the first round is this guy will fix the run game, like what the Steelers did with Najee Harris, that's a bad move because the process is silly. The thought process is just wrong. A running back is not going to fix your run game if the run game is broken because there's too much other things involved in it. And Najee Harris is perfect proof of that. He's been a really good running back, but the Steelers' offensive line doesn't run block well. And so they haven't had the run game, even though Najee Harris has been good. So if that's the motivation that like, hey, we need to really improve the run game, let's draft a running back, it's bad. If you just value a really good running back and you already have the environment in place for that guy to have success, then I don't think there's a problem with drafting a running back in the first round because the contract that those guys are on is not expensive, particularly the lower down the first round you get. I think that stops becoming true once you get beyond a certain point up in the first round. Like if you're talking top 10 running back, now I think it's a different conversation. But if you're drafting a guy in the 20s, that's not an expensive contract if that guy becomes as good as you think he's going to be. So if Cincinnati simply views him as the best player available, and maybe they've gotten rid or dramatically reduce the amount of money that Joe Mixon is going to be getting paid. I don't think that's a bad kind of substitute or a bad alternative going forward. But I'm with you. I don't really see a way that he lasts as long as 2028.
We'll get back to our interview with Sam Monson of Pro Football Focus in just a second. But today's show is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You have opinions about what the Bengals should do in free agency this offseason, in the draft, so much more, right? Well, put that to the test with Ultimate Football GM because you can become the GM of your own franchise and hire the right coaches and coordinators, trade players, navigate the franchise through free agency, the draft, the ups and downs of a season, and so much more. And yes, you can be placed on the hot seat as well. I know some of our Locked On NFL hosts that got fired because they weren't getting the job done. Ultimate Football GM is challenging, it's realistic, and it's going to be perfect for you. Check it out today. And by the way, it is playable offline, so you don't need an internet connection. If you're flying or you have bad connection while you're traveling, it's not a big deal. You can play on your phone, mobile device anyway. So Locked On Bengals listeners, they're going to get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in all capitals. Again, that's Locked On in all capitals. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. Again, ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today.
Bijan Robinson, great player, but really good running back depth. And there's an opportunity cost, of course, when you're talking about using your 28th pick on a running back who, from an offensive fit perspective, I think there's an interesting conversation there too. The Bengals love to go 11. They love to drop back and pass it 40 times a game. They like to use the running game as a change of pace. They get the third most light boxes or something like that in the NFL, or Joe Mixon faced the third most light boxes on the chart that I think I saw tweeted out on Thursday morning. So reasons to think that, hey, Bijan could come in and could be a really good runner for them, could maybe force teams to dedicate more resources to the box a little bit more often. Maybe he's a better receiving back. Maybe he can stay in on 3 downs and pass block as well, which is really why Joe Mixon has been a part-time back for most of his career. But there's all this depth, right? So how do you balance that, knowing that this is a strong running back class and knowing that guys come out of the 7th round and the 4th round and the 5th round all the time to go on and be really, really good, like Ramondre Stevenson comes to mind, really, really good running backs in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I think no draft pick happens in a vacuum, right?
Of
So
course,
it's
right.
always going to depend what the board looks like by the time it rolls around to that pick. I'm simply saying that, like, from a conceptual point of view, I don't think there's anything wrong with drafting a guy like Bijan Robinson at number 28 if he ends up
Right.
being there. Now, if it turned out that, Devin Witherspoon, say, was somehow available at number 28, and now your choice is Devin Witherspoon or Bijan Robinson, now I think it's not a good thing to do, because all of a sudden the concept is completely changed. You're talking the best corner on the board, a guy that's supposed to go in the top 10, maybe even, as high as 5 or 6, is sitting there at your pick, and instead you draft a first-round running back. That, I think, is a different conversation and crazy. But, like, from just a broad abstract terms, there's nothing wrong with taking a guy there. The other thing is, I think that already does factor in position value, opportunity costs, that you can get a guy lower down. Bijan Robinson could arguably be the number 1 player in this draft in terms of just abstract draft grade, right? If you didn't factor in positional value and just like, who is the best player in this draft relative to the competition, relative to everybody else, he might be the number 1 graded player in this draft. But he plays running back, so he might last as low as, the late 20s. You're already kind of correcting for opportunity cost and market and position value at that point. And it becomes, all right, is he that much better, or are you that much more confident that he'll be great than whatever guy you're going to pick in the 4th round, because you can get running backs later on, versus, the 5th best cornerback or the 3rd best tackle, or, whatever that looks like. That, I think, there's always that kind of, in addition to just how good is a player, there's a confidence level of how confident are you of your evaluation of a particular player,
which we know NFL teams are perfect at. They never miss evaluations, and that's why we don't talk at all about taking more. No, I'm being very sarcastic to everyone watching who doesn't get it. There's a lot of evidence that teams should take more swings whenever possible, accumulate draft picks, because they generally tend to trust their evaluations too much. Let's shift gears again. Let's talk tight ends. Tight end makes sense for the Bengals. They have one, I believe, under contract, and that's Mitchell Wilcox, their 3rd tight end. And I like Mitchell Wilcox. He has some funny highlights out there. One catch in particular on like a relatively busted coverage where he's got 2 hands on the ball and he's looking around over his shoulder on a 4th down to make sure he doesn't get caught from behind. But the Bengals are going to add a tight end of some sort, whether it's in free agency or in the draft. We know they wanted to draft a tight end last year. They couldn't quite find the value they wanted based on how last year's draft went. How far does this depth go? There's obviously the 4 guys at the top that everyone's talking about as potential first rounders, but is it strong throughout, in your opinion?
I think it's stronger than we've seen for a while, but I do think there's a drop off after those first few guys. I think there's a gap before you start talking about tight ends again in the mid rounds. But those top few it's a really strong class at the top. Like, we're in this world where tight ends teams are very reluctant to take these guys in the 1st round, and we could have multiple tight ends going in the 1st round this year. Like, that's, I think, a very different conversation that we've been having for a while. If you kind of put Kyle Pitts to the side as being something slightly different to a tight end, because He didn't go number 4 overall because he's a really good tight end. He went number 4 overall because he's some sort of, freak unicorn athlete that could do anything.
So where's the fit? What do you think? I mean, how do you balance the general learning curve for tight ends that we see, where a lot of times it takes a couple years? If you're the Bengals, do you just approach that and say, I'm going to make sure I get a Foster Moreau or bring back Hayden Hurst, and then I'm going to draft a guy as well because, I want to make sure I have the veteran there, much like we talked about with right tackle. If you're the Bengals, you want to make sure you have a veteran at that spot?
Yeah, and I think teams are deploying multiple tight ends as well. It's not as, it's not that every team is running 2 tight end sets every play or even the majority of their offense, but teams are rotating through tight ends and using them in different roles a lot more now than they used to. So you can have tight ends with different roles. And if you have a guy that's very specific to one skill set, you can get him on the field and not necessarily ask him to do a bunch of things that he isn't great at doing. So yeah, I would be all for trying to build in a little bit of insurance and insulation in addition to the tight end that you draft. But a guy like Michael Mayer from Notre Dame is a complete tight end. Like, that guy can do everything. I think there's a pretty good chance he can step in and be good at everything day one and be your alpha tight end right out of the box.
Last one to talk about with the combine coming up. Anyone you're really excited to see that's going to maybe affect where their draft stock goes the most? I'm thinking about Kalijah Cansey as one example, just given his size. Like, the athleticism is clearly there, but what's he going to weigh in at? Right, he's 6 foot. We think about Geno Atkins all the time, of course, in Cincinnati. Similar mold, definitely was a stronger player, I think, than what we've seen from Cansey on tape so far in terms of holding point of attack, using power as well as part of his game. Are there names that jump out to you that the combine is a big deal for them?
Yeah, I think that's a good one that you named. I'm really intrigued to see what Jackson Smith-Njigba is able to put up in terms of numbers, speed in particular, because that's going to be a knock on him from a lot of people. And then obviously this is the first time we're going to get some numbers put to this, like, meme that is Bryce Young at this point. Like, what are our official numbers going to be? Are we going as low as 5'10"? Are we going even lower than that? Are we going to end up, like, they're talking about him trying to get to 200 pounds or something by the combine through presumably just pure water weight and whatever else he can pack on, like, whatever number he ends up weighing in as well. Everybody immediately is going to be mentally taking 10 pounds off that right off the bat. But even then, it might not be anything more than like 190 pounds.
Wild. It's an interesting quarterback class for sure. And that's no exception to the rule. Sam, appreciate your time today, talking a little bit about the draft, a little bit about off-season strategy, some good notes on running back value in the draft. And that's going to be a debate, I think, that happens among Bengals fans quite a bit. And I don't know if Jahmyr Gibbs is going to enter that conversation or not, but we'll see as things go. You can go find Sam, of course, on the PFF NFL podcast. Most recent episode about the free agency class. We're, of course, looking way ahead. We're talking about the draft today, but some good notes there with also a friend of the show, Brad Spielberger, talking about the free agency class. You can go check that out over on the PFF NFL podcast on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcast. And Sam, appreciate the time. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.